All right, so you've built this Mendix app, and it's like functional. It's pretty much good to go. Congrats. But before we start celebrating, got to talk about polish, not like adding crazy features, but the stuff that makes your app, future-proof.
It's that extra mile, right?
Yeah.
Making it hum behind the scenes.
Exactly. And that's what we're diving into today. We've got this Mendix blog post all about going the extra mile, plus some awesome community tips on performance, and of course, those official Mendix best practices. Can't forget those.
Talking security, maintainability, performance, the works.
And we're not just listing them off, we're getting into the nitty-gritty of WHY. This stuff matters.
Because it's about the benefits, right?
Yeah.
Less pain, more gain down the line.
Totally. And the blog, it jumps right in with this term, technical debt. I feel like we've all been there.
Oh, yeah, technical debt. Those little shortcuts that, well, they come back to haunt you.
Oh, tell me about it. Like, remember that time we talked about data validation?
Skipping it seems so tempting at first.
Until you have a million records and they're all messed up. Then it's panic mode.
Or picture this. You're building an app and you decide to cram all your logic into one giant microflow.
Oh, yeah.
Sure, it works at first, but try going back to update that thing a few months later. Or, even worse, imagine a new developer trying to understand that mess. Nightmare.
It's like trying to find a needle in a haystack, but the haystack is on fire.
And that's exactly why this polish is so important. Taking the time to do it right up front. Clean code, documentation, the whole 9 yards, it pays off big time later.
Right. So instead of that tangled mess, you've got this like system. Each microflow has a purpose. It's all documented. You can actually understand what's going on.
Exactly. And that brings us to another perk of a well-polished app.
Maintainability.
Music to my ears.
Yeah.
Because who wants to spend hours deciphering code that looks like it was written in ancient hieroglyphs?
Nobody. Maintainability is all about making your app easy to understand, update, and manage, even if you haven't looked at the code in months. Future you will send you a thank you note. Okay, so maintainability is key. What else makes this polish so important?
Well, the blog highlighted something that's often overlooked. Developer experience.
So making the app developer-friendly, too, not just user-friendly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because a well-structured, well-documented app is just more enjoyable to work with, less frustration, better collaboration. Everyone's happy.
And when you're deep in a project, that makes a world of difference. Nobody wants to open up an app and just feel dread because the code is so bad.
You've got that right. And this ties in directly with those community tips we mentioned earlier. They're full of great advice on writing efficient microflows, handling data, that sort of thing, just making your life easier.
It's true. Happy developers, happy app, right? But speaking of things that might cause a little developer stress, security.
Right. Got to make sure our apps are bulletproof.
Exactly. Even the prettiest app is useless if it's got security holes.
Like building a fortress and forgetting to lock the back door.
Ouch. So where do we even start with Mendix security? It can seem kind of overwhelming.
Well, one of the most important things is the principle of least privilege. Sounds fancy, but it's actually pretty simple.
Okay, break it down for me.
It's like, imagine you're giving someone access to your house. You wouldn't give them keys to every single room, right?
Definitely not. Especially not the snack drawer. So how does that translate to Mendix apps?
Same idea. We only give users access to the stuff they absolutely need to do their job. No more, no less.
Makes sense. So no more giving everyone admin rights just to be safe.
Exactly. And the blog had a great tip about this, something about default attribute rights.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
They recommend setting those to none for new entities. Forces you to be deliberate about permissions from the get-go.
So you're building security in from the start instead of trying to bolt it on later.
Exactly. It's way easier in the long run. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, right?
Totally. Saves you a ton of headaches down the line. And speaking of simple but effective, the blog also mentioned renaming that default admin user.
Ah, yes. Gotta love that one.
It seems so obvious now, but I'll admit I've totally overlooked that in the past.
It's like changing the locks in your new house. A small step, but it makes a big difference.
Don't be the low-hanging fruit, right?
Exactly. Make those hackers work for it.
Now, shifting gears a bit, let's talk about data models. This is where things can get messy fast if we're not careful.
Oh, yeah. The community tips had a lot to say about data modeling. And one thing that stood out was like the importance of keeping it simple.
Because a well-structured data model is the backbone of a healthy app. Everything's organized, easy to find, like a well-organized library.
And a messy one is like That one drawer in my kitchen. You know the one.
We've all got that drawer full of random stuff. You're not even sure what's in there anymore.
Exactly. But in Mendix, a messy data model means performance issues, inconsistencies, all kinds of bad news.
Exactly. And that's where those community tips come in handy. They had some great advice on using indexes wisely.
Indexes, like the index in a book.
Exactly. They help the database find information quickly, but too many can actually slow things down. So it's a balancing act.
Right. Enough to be helpful, but not so many that they become counterproductive. Especially important for apps with tons of data.
Right, like that inventory app we talked about earlier. If you indexed every single thing, it would be a nightmare.
Exactly. Like trying to find a book in a library where every single word is indexed.
So how do we know what to index?
Good question. A good rule of thumb is to focus on attributes that are used a lot in searches or to join data. Like in that inventory app, product names, customer IDs, order numbers, those are the things people will be searching on all the time.
So think about how the data will actually be used.
Exactly. And that leads us to another important aspect of data modeling: associations. The relationships between all those entities.
Yes, those lines connecting everything. I remember when I was starting out, those could get pretty crazy pretty quickly.
Like a family tree. Gets complicated fast. But just like with indexes, we want to keep those associations clean and efficient.
So less is more.
In a way, yes. One principle to keep in mind is don't repeat yourself, or DRY.
TRY. I like it. That was like good advice in general, but what does it mean for data modeling?
It means making sure you're not storing the same information in multiple places.
So no more redundant attributes or entities.
Exactly. If you find yourself doing that, it's a sign you might need to rethink your data model.
Okay, I'm starting to see the light. So instead of like having customer addresses scattered all over the place.
You create a dedicated address entity. You just link your other entities to that. No more repeating yourself.
Much cleaner. So it's all about thinking strategically, right? Both for indexes and associations.
Absolutely. A well-structured data model makes everything run smoother. Better data integrity, easier maintenance. It's a win-win.
It's all about having a system, right? And that reminds me, the blog and those best practices, they both talk about visual organization too, like inside the app itself.
Ah, yes. Because who wants to open up a microflow that looks like a plate of spaghetti?
Ugh, don't even get me started on spaghetti code. It's like the worst.
The worst. But luckily, Mendix gives us the tools to keep things, visually organized. Makes a huge difference for maintainability, collaboration, the whole 9 yards.
Right, like I'd much rather follow a recipe from a nice cookbook than some scribbled on napkin.
100%. And one of the simplest things you can do, color coding those microflows.
Oh, color coding is a game changer.
Right. Makes it so much easier to see what's going on. Like green for happy path, orange for integrations.
Red for danger, Will Robinson.
Exactly. Visual cues make all the difference. And while we're talking about cleaning things up, the blog also mentioned those unused elements we tend to collect.
Oh, you mean my collection of maybe someday widgets? Don't tell me I have to get rid of those.
Well, it's like that junk drawer, right? It's tempting to keep everything just in case, but...
But it just creates clutter and makes it harder to find what you actually need.
Exactly. So take a little time to purge those unused elements. Your future self will thank you.
Makes sense. Out with the old, in with the... Well, not necessarily new stuff, but definitely the essential stuff.
Well said. And speaking of essential, the blog also touched on staying current with Mendix Studio Pro and those marketplace modules.
Oh, yeah, updates. Gotta love them. Like having the latest software on your phone, fewer bugs, better security, all that good stuff.
Exactly. And those marketplace modules can be lifesavers, right? Pre-built components save you tons of time.
So much time. But I will say I've definitely run into issues with updating modified modules. It's like trying to fit a square peg in a round hole.
You're telling me. So that's something to keep in mind. The convenience of a pre-built module versus the potential headaches of customizing it too much.
It's a trade-off, for sure. Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. Technical debt, security, data modeling, even visual organization.
It's been quite a journey. But the key takeaway is this. Polishing your Mendix app, it's not just about making it pretty. It's about building a solid foundation for the future.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And it makes you think, right, we've talked a lot about the technical side of things, but what about the user experience?
Oh, absolutely. Because a beautifully coded app is useless if it's a pain to actually use.
Exactly. So as you're building those amazing Mendix apps, think about the users. How can you make the experience clear, efficient, enjoyable? Something to ponder. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.